Welcome to the Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, el Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we have had to discontinue our in-person events for the last 2.5 years. But today we are able to do it in person as well. Without our previous revenue generating programs, we now depend on your donations to support these webinars and to be able to pay our local staff. You can donate at our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. Today's program is on the last year. That was the year that was. We have four distinguished persons who will be sharing their assessments of the past year. And I'd like to begin with Jerry Harris, who is head of the Global Studies Association. And take it away, Jerry.
This is the position I didn't want to be in, the first one. So I think we have about 10 or 15 minutes apiece, and then hopefully we can have a round of discussions and back and forth. I think there's three major things. The first, really, I won't speak on much, is the ongoing ecological crisis, which I think will be the dominant issue, actually, in many ways going forward, even given the various political crises that we continually face. But the two areas where I want to concentrate a little bit more is actually on the neo-fascist white supremacy threat, and also what has become perhaps the biggest division in the left for a long time, which is Ukraine. So let me first say that I think that the fascist white supremacy threat is the main danger in the United States. And that means for the left working with allies and with folks we don't agree with on a lot of stuff even, as long as they're willing to stand up for the defense of democracy. And that, of course, includes many elements within the Democratic Party on such issues as abortion rights and voting rights and us pushing labor rights and many issues. But I think for some sections of the left, there's still sort of what I would say a lack of recognition of the seriousness of the neo-fascist threat. And they still tend to equate sort of centrist Democrats on an equal level of threat with the neo-fascists and the white supremacists and the far-right Christian evangelists who are running the Republican Party these days. And I think we see how much of an international trend this is, given what just went down in Brazil yesterday. And I think actually this may stem from a longstanding problem for us on the left, which was a underappreciation of liberal democracy, which we actually use every day to organize. Freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom to march in the streets, freedom to have this forum right now ongoing. And, you never appreciate democracy until it's gone or, until it's under the threat. So I think we really that's really sort of the major struggle today is the defense of liberal democracy, because if we don't defend that, we'll never reach socialist democracy. Back in the 70s, I spent some time in South America, and I was heading towards Chile when Allende was president. He was, of course, assassinated in that horrible coup when I was in Colombia, so I proceeded to Argentina instead. And almost everybody who I worked with and knew in Argentina, after the military coup went down, was arrested, was tortured, were disappeared, and went into exile. And so I've always taken fascism really serious since then, because all those people I knew were just like us, everyone on the left I knew in the US, but they faced these really serious, horrific conditions under the military dictatorship. So I think, the left, we really need to start broadening our outlook and broadening our alliances, putting away some of our differences, and really get serious about trying to defeat the what I would say is a neo-confederacy. And then that allows us to proceed on to other victories, and in terms of pushing our more full agenda, which of course we have. The other thing on Ukraine, if I can turn to that for 5 or 10 minutes. Obviously, this has become perhaps the biggest dividing line on the left I've seen in many years. For myself, I'm on the side of Ukrainian independence and self-determination, unquestionably. And I think that has long been a socialist principle. Actually, going back to Marx and Engels, who wrote in detail about Ireland, and proceeding through Lenin and the Comintern and the Bandung Conference and Zhou Enlai and Ho Chi Minh and many others. I think for those of us, and I'm looking at the age of the folks here I see in the Zoom, most of us came to maturity during the Vietnam War and the tremendous tide of liberation struggles in the Third World and the post-World War II era and right through the 60s and early 70s. So I've always remembered Ho Chi Minh's slogan, "Nothing is more precious than independence and self-determination." And I've taken that to heart in thinking about Ukraine, because independence, whether it's in Ukraine or Vietnam or Cuba or Venezuela or Angola, Mozambique, it's the first step. So I think some folks, unfortunately, underestimate the neo-fascist nature of the Russian government, in the same way they underestimate the fascist or neo-fascist character of the Republican Party. There's sort of a consistency there, unfortunately. So I know a lot of folks talk about proxy war, the NATO-US versus Russia, and that is certainly an aspect. But I think there's a problem in one-sidedness with the proxy war analysis, because it comes directly actually out of the realist school of foreign policy of George Kennan and Kissinger. The idea that there are legitimate security concerns for great powers, that there are spheres of influence, that resistant fighters are always a proxy for one power or the other. And, we were inundated with that back in the 60s, right? That whether it was Angola, Mozambique, whether it was Vietnam, whether it was Cuba, everybody had to be a proxy of the Russians or the Soviets, right? There was no room for, and nobody was fighting for the Soviets. Everybody was fighting for their own just cause. They were all fighting for their own independence. And of course, they had a right to accept political and military support from wherever they can get it. As Malcolm said, freedom by any means necessary. And so I think, to me, in my thinking, that still applies to Ukraine today, the right of independence and self-determination. They've been invaded by a foreign army. They have the right, the absolute right to self-defense, including accepting arms from anywhere that they can get them. And if they weren't able to get those arms, the reality is that they would be defeated. already defeated and with much of their territory annexed. That doesn't mean that the proxy, the tensions and what NATO has done in its eastward expansion is not real. It is, certainly. And we should take an anti-NATO stance. But what's the principal contradiction here? And what is the secondary contradiction? So to me, the principal contradiction is that an independent country has been invaded by a foreign imperialist power that is waging a war against the civilian population with murder and rapes and tortures. And we have to stand with those folks first and primarily. It even bothers me, some of the sort of slogans or sayings some of the folks have come up with, such as, the West is willing to fight to the last Ukrainian. To me, that's just up and up outright chauvinism and an insult to the Ukrainian people. We never would have said that of the Vietnamese people, that the Russians are willing to fight to the last Vietnamese. What an insult to the Vietnamese people. In fact, we praise the heroic struggle of the Vietnamese people, even though there was tremendous suffering, probably greater maybe than what Ukraine is today, although the suffering in Ukraine is getting pretty damn intense. So we gave the Vietnamese people unconditional support. We gave the liberation struggles in Africa unconditional support. We gave the liberation struggles in Latin America unconditional support. And the internal contradictions, of which there are many in Ukraine, language rights, there's a small amount of fascists who are fighting the Russians, the neoliberalism of the Zelensky regime. All those are internal secondary contradictions. They may become primary at a point. But today, the primary contradiction, in my mind at least, is the Russian invasion and the fighting and the dying and the suffering that goes on every day. So I think these are the main issues that were confronting us last year and will confront us again this year, ongoing. And just because the Republicans were at each other's throat this last week in Congress doesn't mean that they won't get together on attacking labor rights and women's rights and minority rights. And we really have to stand strong there and organize with every friend that we can find. So that's it for me, and I'm interested in listening to our other speakers. Thank you. Is Cliff coming back in?
Well, thank you, Jerry. And we'll have opportunity for questions afterwards. But next, we want to hear from Ajowa Ifateyo. She is a cooperative activist. So take it away, Ajowa.
Thank you, Cliff. So I'm with an organization called Grassroots Economic Organizing. It's an online publication that dedicates its work to supporting cooperatives and the solidarity economy. We're based in the US, but we have readers and contributors all over the world. And it's called GEO, and you can reach it at geo.coop. And so we cover a lot of issues. And one of the things that's like really standing out for me is that we seem to have a lot of people on the move now, which is a good thing. And when I say on the move, I mean in action, demonstrating, figuring out different ways on how to live or survive because of the pandemic. Well, so the pandemic, I think, was the impetus for a lot of movement, a lot of education, a lot of shaking up of people to realize that the world that we're used to can really fall apart, and realizing also that we need each other and we need people. And so I think that has caused a lot of people to reevaluate and figure out, how to survive. I mean, just a lot of people moved from cities into countries. A lot of people starting cooperatives, housing cooperatives, movements to help feed people who were not getting food. We see a lot of organizing on the ground to help people who were hurt by a lot of the closures, restaurants, stores, all kinds of businesses that were disrupted. So we see a lot of that, a lot more people interested in starting worker co-ops, housing co-ops, health co-ops, just to take care of basic needs. And then on the other hand, we saw, back last year, a lot of movement of people organizing against police violence. And it's just amazing thing how police violence, particularly against African Americans, just seems to go on. And no matter what level of organization, it keeps happening. It's like, after George Floyd and all of these things that people always want to talk about again, let's give police more training, let's do this and that. And then the following month, another person is killed in some crazy manner. And so, we had a lot of movement of Black Lives Matter going on. We had a lot of organizing that was amazing kind of stuff that people thought would never happen. We had workers organizing a union at Amazon, the biggest, exploiter on the planet. And we had people starting unions at Starbucks and Trader Joe's and Chipotle. We had union workers supporting abortion rights. We had, a lot of people, truckers, independent truckers, trying to organize. Even strippers in Hollywood organizing. Everybody's organizing because part of our world has been upset, and the inequities have really been shown. You might have been able to explain certain things away. Well, Black people are this because they're lazy, or all kinds of stuff. But now everybody's affected. Everybody sees the connection between those people who, hey, maybe coming to the country. They're the ones that pick the produce. They're the ones that have the low-paying jobs. Just all these class divisions are being understood to not be that important. You might have all the money you need, but who's picking your food? Who's at the store checking you out? Who are the nurses that are taking care of you? So there's an understanding now in this country, and probably other places in the world, that we're more connected than we realize, and that you cannot be in your silo and not be concerned about the rest of the people who are making society run, and the rest of the world who we depend on for food and other kinds of support. So that's one thing I thought was really interesting this year, 2022. And also people being on the move, particularly young people, in elections. We saw young people really turn the tide, coming out to vote and voting against some of these conservative policies, voting against people who want to keep guns on the street at any cost, voting because they want to see a change, and voting because, women are not going back. They took Roe away, the right to abortion away. And some of these younger women have grown up always being able to get an abortion or to control their bodies in whichever way they see fit. And then now you think you're going to just take it away like that? And so we just saw some really creative organizing among women activists and their supporters to make sure that a woman gets to choose how she can handle her own body. We see people like in Baltimore, Maryland, where homeless, like it's last time I looked, it was like, I don't remember, but a large number, like almost a third of the people who are having housing issues are basically homeless. And there's like miles and miles of housing that's just sitting there and not being developed. And there have been struggles to get that housing developed, but we saw, and this is another international issue, companies from all over the world wanting to come in, buy up property, raise housing that some people are even living in, to develop it and make money. Housing is a way for a lot of capitalists to make money, and that is basic human rights that everybody should be guaranteed. It should not be something that somebody figures, hey, I can make some money off of people's need to have decent housing, and forget the people who are living there, forget the people who are homeless and need housing. And I'm just going to do what I can to make money and not feel the need for housing. So we have struggles like that are really like in your face, like makes, I think, most people question capitalism and the kind of system that we're living under, where the right for medical care is not something that everybody can have, a decent home is not something that everybody can have. And often these are people who are working 2 or 3 jobs, but they're not getting living wages. They're working minimum wage, and it's hard to even afford an apartment for a lot of people. I live in Washington, D.C., and the prices are off the chain. You can't even get a studio apartment for less than $1,500 a month. And most 1-bedroom apartments are like $3,000 a month. So a lot of poor people just had to exit DC and live in surrounding cities because it's just getting that crazy. And, on the other hand, we have, people like Elon Musk trying to take over the Native Americans' lands in Texas for his space adventures, and supporting a lot of Republican craziness. So we just have a lot of people who are really, I think, trying to survive, trying to figure out how to hold on, what we can do. We have a lot of people who lost housing because, there was some support in the beginning, with the government having moratoriums against putting people out if they couldn't pay. But a lot of that stuff is run out now. So some people are hitting the streets because there's no more support. And not to even mention, we don't hear a lot about it, but there are a lot of people who were mentally affected by COVID, not being around other people, just being forced indoors with, maybe they have their children all day now where they used to be able to send them to school, or maybe their spouse is home and tensions are really building up because, it's hard on everybody. So we saw an increase in domestic abuse. We saw children failing. And it just seems like we have now, at least in DC, and I think in some other cities, more crime, more crazy driving, people driving, 90 miles an hour on city streets. It's just like, it seems like people are just reacting and lost and just don't know what to do. So I see this as an opportunity or a moment in history where we can really, hopefully, segue or organize our way into to help people figure out where we go from here. What do we do? What kind of organizations can we have? How can we barter and help take care of communities? How can we do mutual aid? Because the government, Biden has done some good things, but really the government is not capable, that the economy is not capable on how to take care of all of our needs. And the other movement we have is like immigration. A lot of people are fleeing some of these really bad situations. And so we have to figure out how to help people all over the world to survive. So to me, it's like a time that's coming together where if I don't know exactly how we can do it, but at least think of this as an opportunity to organize, to show people a different way, to show a different kind of economy, to show what white supremacy has done to a whole lot of people and how capitalists have destroyed the world and, want to cut off mountaintops and do all kinds of crazy things to the planet and not even face that we're dealing with a crisis of climate and other stuff. I mean, we had this hurricane this year that killed like 126 people, and other, fires, drought, all kinds of things are happening simultaneously. And so it seems like to me, I don't know if 2022 is going to be the last time that we had a world like it is now. But it seems to me we are in a period of a lot of change, a lot of growth. We don't know what kind of situation we'll be in with the pandemic or a different pandemic. So I think it's just an opportunity to organize, to figure out how we can support each other across borders, how we can continue these kinds of conversations to talk about, divisions, coalitions, and what we all can do to help push the movement to creating a better world where all of us thrives. And that's me, check. Thank you.
So we're not sure.
Thank you, Ajowa. Next, we will be hearing from Arturo Yarish, retired historian, who's going to be here with us live in San Miguel. So take it away. I'm just trying to unmute you. Okay. That's okay, just go ahead. Oh, okay. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you may be in the world. I find it an honor to be included in the grouping of speakers with whom I find identification and enrichment. Therefore, especially after the last speaker, I feel doubly honored because I don't have to go into the details which were extremely well explained. We're in a crisis. So you ask me, we're in a crisis, what's new? And what can we do? Well, part of the explanation is that we must organize wherever we can. In fact, we are presently, speaking in the United States, but also in many other parts of the world, at a great deficit because we are not yet able to organize ourselves broadly. We're sort of in productive pockets of efforts which are not fully yet connected. Although we are currently seeing outreach, we are currently witnessing cooperatives, cooperative producer cooperatives, and consumer cooperatives being supported, students' efforts, home efforts by homeless. So you ask us mentally, what can we do? How can we do it? I would like to offer what we may call the long view. I would also like to offer a more panoramic view. And to do that, I would like to place at the center of the discussion a dialectical position of domestic imperialism and all that is done, or very little that is done, to placate the population of the imperialist center, the United States. A measure of that placation, a measure of that crisis is Biden arriving on the frontier of Mexico and the United States in what we might call a super armored vehicle. That's a measure of the crisis that we are facing. And what is the context and the form of that crisis? Well, Jerry Harris alluded to it, is the confrontation on, what shall we call it, the push to the east, the fear that is measured by increasing military budgets, the effort to increase military budgets worldwide to confront the Great Bear. And the Great Bear now reaching out along with the great dragon, the awakened dragon, the powerful re-emerging dragon, and the United States is afraid. So the Republicans especially in the right wing, demonstrating their extreme disorganization over the past few days, disrupt the entire process of public assuasion, shall we say. And the Democrats can't do more than offer a few crumbs. We face a concentration of wealth in the world in which we see that less than 5% of the world's wealth is, 90% of the world's wealth is controlled by less than 5% of the people, while 5% of the people in the world have to manage their lives on 80%. That is the feed ground for very dramatic change. The United States and its imperialist allies can see this very, very well, very clearly, as I mentioned and emphasize again, with Biden rushing to the Mexican border in his armored truck, or whatever it may be called, a tank-like SUV, to offer nearshoring meaning reindustrialization of Mexico for the benefit of the United States. We are in a crisis. So once again, you tell me, what is the nature of this crisis? So what's new? We have cyclical crises. We have had experiences of structural crises. And now we face ourselves, confront ourselves. I'm from the United States, living in Mexico. We confront ourselves with the challenge, unprecedented, in which capitalism is in a three-part crisis, which it cannot, at this point in the foreseeable future, satisfactorily resolve for the benefit of its own ruling class. Not for the benefit of the working people, not for the benefit of the sick and the dying. We witnessed that the death rate in the United States was exponentially higher than other places in the world in proportion to the world's population. No, what we are witnessing is an effort to again reorganize so that the United States ruling class can find investment outlets. Now, I think it was around 1955, 1956 or 57, when Schumpeter declared that capitalism was creative processes of, or was it destruction? Well, if it was creative at that time, it is destructive destruction now. We have to look at what is happening in the East as a tactical ploy for expansion through extensive and intensive destruction. And the cost of that destruction is the cost that will be visited on those people in the area who have an enormous fear of the long view of history. Now, let me frame that for my colleagues and the audience, local audience here and listening and viewing group more widely. Crisis of capital can only be resolved through the process of reproductive allocation of surplus. That means no profit, no production. Now, we are faced with a situation in which the process of production is basically stalled because of conflict, stalled because of overproduction, underutilization of productive services. This is both an opportunity, as was already alluded to, an opportunity to find greater uses for surplus in socially valuable services and socially designed products. But this is not what's being done. What is being done is increasing military budgets to create a destructive atmosphere and destruction in reality, to perhaps redeploy a kind of Marshall Plan. In other words, destroy the Eastern countries as happened in Yugoslavia in the 90s, and at the same time, create an investment opportunity as was done during the war in the Middle East. Destroy the area, destroy infrastructure so as to rebuild it. This absorbs the available money that is being sequestered, hidden in banks. It is another means of deploying funds for profitable purposes. At the same time, we might think on a global scale, taking a broader view, that it intimidates. The posture intimidates the Europeans. The Europeans know that they will be victimized by this war. The United States population is hopefully awakening to the fact that they're being victimized by this war. How many endless wars can the population sustain for the profits of capital? Therefore, what we must do is take note, as Gramsci once wrote, Antonio Gramsci, Italian organizer with Togliatti of the Italian Communist Party, that the old is dying. And I think the capitalists know that the old is dying. But we are not ready yet, quite ready, to give birth to the new. And what will be the new? It must be a people-oriented type of cooperative, socially progressive, and dynamic form of a people control of economy and giving material support, material amplification to what it means to be a social democracy. Thank you very much. Thank you to those who preceded me, and thank you to the audience here. I look forward to your challenging questions. No, thank you, Arturo. Appreciate your comments, and we will look forward to your discussion. Our final speaker, last but not least, is Margaret Flowers. She is an activist in Baltimore, Maryland, or as we say, Baltimore, Maryland. She has been a pediatrician. She has a website on on resistance and a weekly radio program, Clearing the Fog. So let's give the floor to Margaret.
Thank you, Cliff. Good to see everyone. I'm getting a echo. There we go. Maybe that's better. All right. So I apologize because I do have to leave soon to pick up my daughter from school. And so I'll make some comments, but I won't be able to stay around for the question and answer part of this event. So I guess where to begin, there's a lot to build off of from the comments that folks have made. I think what's pretty clear is that the neoliberal project in the United States that's been underway for some decades now has been exposed by the multiple crises that we're facing for what it is. Certainly inequalities in wealth and healthcare access and housing, education, all of that, food security, certainly didn't begin with the pandemic, but was widely exposed by the pandemic. And so as a result, out of necessity, we're seeing that organizing that Ajowa talked about, which is a good thing. The world is changing. You know, the United States is throwing everything it can into trying to hold on to the power that it has enjoyed for some time now. But that is changing, and it's much of what the United States is doing is actually serving to be counterproductive, particularly when it comes to dynamics of driving de-dollarization, driving a loss of credibility, a loss of leadership in the world. The United States, is no longer being looked at in the role that it once had. And I think it's important to recognize that when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine, the majority of the world is not standing with the United States and the European Union in that conflict. Particularly global South countries are rejecting the sanctions, are actually viewing this conflict. It's interesting. It's put Russia in an interesting position where the global South views it as an entity that's been able to stand up to the United States. So you see protests in Haiti, protests in Africa, where people are actually carrying Russian flags because they know the damage that the United States has done to their countries, and appreciate seeing another country that's resisting that. So that's an interesting kind of, so much of what the United States backfires on around the world. And we see that particularly with the economic blockades that the United States imposes on more than a third of the world population of the world right now. So the world dynamics are changing. The Pentagon had a report some years ago, the post-primacy report, where it recognized that the US was losing primacy, but the response was, we need more money, more weapons, more intelligence. And that's what we're really seeing as, every year, the bipartisans in Washington, D.C. vote to give more money to the military industrial complex, more to the Pentagon than even is requested. And at the same time that we continue to see cuts, we could solve the student debt crisis. Biden could do that unilaterally. We could continue the support that was begun early in the pandemic, child credits, checks, all of these things that actually had a direct impact on people's lives. The one thing we have right now that we haven't lost yet, as long as the emergency status is in place, millions of people have access to Medicaid without having to worry about losing that. But once the emergency status ends, 15 million people are going to lose that access to healthcare that they had. And at the same time, we see the Department of Health and Human Services working on how to transition so that the government is no longer providing tests, vaccines, medications, things that people need to deal with the pandemic, and instead will be required to purchase those privately. So We didn't have a system in place to deal with the pandemic to begin with. Nothing has changed in that regard. And now we're seeing, this for-profit healthcare system continues on that path, which began way before the pandemic. So there has been this renewed interest in what we do. And that's, I think, the positive thing is that we're seeing a lot of organizing, particularly in the South. We're seeing a lot more militancy within the labor movement. I think this is a positive sign as well, not just the independent unions like the Starbucks workers, the Amazon workers, the tech unions, but also seeing within some of the established unions. So, the defeat in the United Auto Workers, against kind of the power structure there. We saw in the railroad workers, one of the large unions that went ahead with the President Emergency Board recommendations, BLET, an upset in that election for union leadership. And this is another, I think, a struggle. There are a number of kind of key struggles that are going to be ongoing and that are, I think, useful to continue to support. But we're also, as I think Ajowa mentioned, many of the nursing strikes, one that just started this week in New York City, thousands of nurses on strike at private hospitals. The public hospital nurses are not allowed to strike, but I imagine they would be on strike too if they were able to do that. So people recognizing that, no, the system is not going to change unless we actually take action. There is no faith in the structure, either at the local, state, or federal level, to do what's necessary to meet people's needs. And so people are having to take that power into their hands. The railroad workers one, I think, is really interesting for us because the contract that was imposed on them, because they've been without a contract for 3 years, is only going to last for 23 months. So that's going to come back up around very quickly. The majority of the railroad workers were not in support of the Presidential Emergency Board recommendations. The workers that I talked to say that they expect many people to quit, but then that fight is also going to come back up around soon. And I think what's an interesting part, two things about their struggle that we should highlight and support. One is they're calling for nationalization of the railroads. I think that's an important step, a necessary step. But they're also calling for legislation that benefits all workers. They don't see this struggle as strictly about railroad workers. And so building solidarity around that. Of course, we have the UPS contract fight coming up this year. And so connecting these struggles, I think, is going to be really important. I also think, and I'm not the only one who thinks this, that at this point in time, we have to really have a good assessment of where we are politically in the United States and the power structure and how that power structure is maintained and how it can be challenged. And I know that, Jerry mentioned people who think that Democrats and Republicans are similar or whatever. And I think what the real issue is that people recognize that both the Republican and the Democratic Party, there are many similarities. Their support for, corporate wealth and the military-industrial complex and those types of things. But they both serve, those are the interests that they serve. They're not serving the people, and I think people don't have any illusion that they would or could serve the interests of the people. I mean, when you talk about reproductive rights, the Democrats certainly had many opportunities to codify reproductive rights into law. They didn't do that. Why didn't they do that? It's a great election issue. It was vote for us, and in November we'll do something. Then, just vote for us in again and we'll do something. But we see how the promises of the Democrats work out, and Biden has been a very strong embodiment of that with his, failures in so many areas. The pandemic, he was going to be the one who listened to science, but when that is science, went against business profits, it suddenly wasn't an interesting science to him. And so the whole pandemic response is focused on vaccines as opposed to doing so many of the other things that are required to protect people. So we have to have that clarity that's, it's the power at this point does not lie within Congress. Congress is not going to solve the problem. We don't actually live in a democracy. Voting rights are important, but I think that we should recognize that we don't have a democracy to begin with. We have the illusion of a democracy. People who actually represent the interests of the people don't have the ability to run for office or to win because of the money You just can't get the money to even have that, or there's the complicity of the media. I mean, there's so many factors in play here that make our elections, really controlled and not something that's within the power of the people. And I think seeing elections in other countries really opens your eyes to the possibilities, of what we could have. I served as an election observer in Venezuela a few years ago, and that was very interesting to see their system up close. So what we need to at this point in time with the serious crises that we're facing, the existential crises. I mean, it's the risk of nuclear war. Who has first use in their nuclear doctrine? It's the United States. Which country has used nuclear weapons in the past? It's the United States. And we're already seeing kind of in the media these intimations that, we can do short-term nuclear war, whatever they're called, the new nuclear weapons, limited strike or whatever they're called. Seeing this like, here are the cities that Russia would hit, building consensus in the United States for a preemptive strike. This is what we're seeing kind of if you look at what the media is saying. So people, there's so much misinformation about what's happening in Ukraine. And, this is something that popular resistance that we were covering before the coup in 2014, and certainly after the coup, and following what was happening in the Donbass region, following the Minsk agreements, were they being, following the ceasefire violations by the Ukrainian military in the Donbass region. These are all of the factors that are not talked about, unfortunately, that context that's not provided to that struggle. And now we're seeing that same struggle starting to unfold in a greater way in Taiwan, with the approval of hundreds of millions of dollars of weapons sales to Taiwan, and Speaker Pelosi going there, and all of this being designed to antagonize China, and also seeing, hearing members of our Pentagon saying that we need to hasten this conflict with China, that it needs to happen in the next year or so. So these are the real existential crises that we're facing, and the pandemic, the climate crisis, the military-industrial complex, while our systems at home for all of our human needs are not being met. So what this time requires is a real clarity of what's going to solve the problem. I think, as Ajowa said, the awareness that capitalism is not a sustainable economic system is growing, particularly among younger people. And as a mother of young adults, I see that within their friends, but you also see it through the polling and things like that. So we can no longer kind of decide that we can kind of prop up capitalism, or maybe we can make it a kinder, gentler capitalism. That's just not a reality. We're going to have to be very clear about the political program that we would like to see, and not be afraid to say that we need to move towards socialist systems, that we need to be municipalizing, nationalizing the services, that we need, stronger workplace democracy, stronger economic measures to give people security. These are the types of demands that we should be having. And this is something that we were pushing at the beginning of the pandemic, that we should be demanding universal health care. We should be demanding a universal basic income. We should be demanding affordable housing, childcare, workplace protections. This should have been part of that conversation. We were pushing it, but it didn't, unfortunately, take off quite in the way that we had hoped. I think as well that it's important for us to recognize that this solidarity in the United States is not so much about the United people of the United States helping other countries, because I've been to a lot of countries where we could have so much to learn from the people there. It's about showing real solidarity, focusing on the actions of our own country. If you want to talk about the conflict in Ukraine, let's talk about the role that the United States has played. I don't know why people are focused on Russia. What happens within Russia is not within my control. That's within the control of the Russian people. But I do know what my country did, and I know how my country supported the coup openly. I know how my country has trained and armed the military in Ukraine, which does include a significant Nazi element, which unfortunately has only grown since the coup in 2014. And the weapons that we're sending there, we don't have accountability for those, as we're starting to see a thwarted terror attack in Italy. Not that long ago, maybe a month or so ago. We don't know where these weapons are going. We do know people are coming from all over the world to train with the far right fascists in Ukraine, and including people within the United States that are doing that. So that's another concern. But I'm digressing. I think what's really important is that we make linkages with social movements and worker movements and indigenous movements in other countries, recognizing that they have been standing up to the conditions that we're facing for a very long time, that they know how to survive, that they have that political clarity and education, and understand what it really takes to change these systems. And I'm inspired by what's happening in Honduras, in Colombia, in Bolivia, in Venezuela. I mean, there's so many examples there that we have that we can learn from. So I would just say in this year, let's look for opportunities for political education, for political clarity, for understanding how we can best wield our power, and then building that solidarity with each other, and recognizing that much of the solidarity for people in the United States, I mean, there are opportunities for direct aid, as we saw to Cuba with, getting syringes there and getting hurricane supplies there. But a lot of that solidarity also focuses on us recognizing the role that our government plays and pushing back against that. And I'll stop there. And unfortunately, I have to leave and go get my daughter, but it's been great to be with everybody. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Margaret. It's good to hear from you. And now we open the floor for questions and comments from whomever, our live audience here, or those on Zoom. I might point out that one of the purposes of the Center for Global Justice is to make America think again. All right, who would like to ask the first question or make the first comment?
Well, I've put a lot of stuff
Why
in
don't you come up here?
the chat. I
See.
hope people got a chance to read it.
Well, I'm just more concerned, I think, with overpopulation and with a planet that is definitely going to run out of water if this expansion of territory continues. And we've got to expand in order to have the proper types of housing that we're talking about, and the types of services and the buildings to have these services that we're talking about. And it just seems to me, at my later years, that we do not talk enough about overpopulation and what we are going to do about it continuing to the end. So that's my question.
Okay. Other questions or comments, or members of the panel can react to one another also. One of the things that we have not talked about is Mexico. There has been an ongoing struggle with the drug cartels here in Mexico. And in this last week, it's really heated up in the state of Sinaloa when Chapo's son was arrested. Last time he was arrested, there was so much violence, they let him go, but this time they're not going to do that, it seems. But their cars have been firebombed. The airport was shut down. An airplane, a small airplane, was even shot down. And there are reports that the cartels have obtained the latest weapons that the U.S. is just giving to Ukraine. And if they start using that, well, it's going to get even more serious. And unfortunately, many of the expats here in San Miguel aren't aware of that. I have a friend who was planning on driving to the border to shop. And we warned her that it ain't safe, don't go. And she hadn't been aware of the danger. Yeah, another question. Yeah.
So my question is that I think definitely Margaret and I think to maybe a slightly lesser extent Arturo gave the impression that the war in Ukraine was promoted, precipitated on purpose by the United States. And I don't see that. And I'd like, if I am correct, I might be wrong in that assumption, that's the impression I got. If I'm correct, can you, Margaret's not with us now, but can you expand on that and give some structure to that suggestion?
Can I say something about that?
I'll frame my response to you historically. In every crisis period in the United States, since its inception, its independence from England, has been expansionist for various reasons. The expansion was first from the Atlantic to the Pacific, and in the course, as some of us know very well, dating back to Jefferson with an eye toward the Caribbean. In each crisis, with the closing of the frontier, famously phrased by historian, a U.S. historian, the closing of the frontier, expansion to the east for various reasons. Under the general notion of expanding trade, capital needs to continue to expand. In each case, where the accumulation of wealth has found no investment outlets, expansion was sustained, aggressively pursued. In the case right up into World War II, but also before that in World War I, there's a very famous phrase, if you might like to watch again, with great reward, intellectual and theatrical reward. Warren Beatty is asked to speak in his hometown, and he said, before the Republican Club in Oregon at that time, and he's asked to summarize Wilson's purpose in going to war, or would Wilson go to war, and what was the purpose? And he said, well, geez, I'm imitating. He says, I really have to put this in a succinct way for profit. I think the wars in Afghanistan are the continuation of the wars in the period of World War II, when the Germans and the British were competing for Middle East oil. And now the war precipitated in the East, in the Ukraine. Maybe I'm only speculating with some degree of knowledge, to control the center of agricultural production in Europe. Massive possibilities. And the flow of oil. Who destroyed Nord Stream oil pipelines? We don't really know. We may need to live 3 lifetimes to know. But we do know that there cannot be an expansion of profits without the expansion of the opportunities to invest. We have reached a phase of capitalist destruction, not creative destruction as I referred to earlier, but destructive destruction to reinvest, as we saw in the Bush war in the Middle East following 2002. Furthermore, we have to take note that from 1917 and 1949, a massive area of the world was excluded from capitalist reinvestment. If we read some of the noted commentary, I cite one, Smedley Butler, who called himself a gangster of capitalism throughout his entire career, which spanned approximately the invasion of Haiti, 1913, 1915, to his retirement in, I believe, 1934, 35, somewhere around there, when he reviewed his own personal history, one among many, that he was openly, knowledgeably, and became educated as a gangster of capitalism. And in each case, United States and other countries, but principally the United States, have maneuvered themselves to create the ruling class, not the people of the United States, the working people, have maneuvered themselves to a position of unsurmountable military power. But to sustain that military power, presently under the current configuration of the relationships of forces in the world, it must continue to destroy. One of the fears that the United States has is that the Chinese, whether you call them communist, socialist, or Chinese style of capitalism, are playing the same game in a new way. And that is, unlike the United States, offering assistance without demanding, as during the Marshall Plan, a commensurate and compensatory reinvestment and purchase of US goods. This zero interest loans, for example. Call it what you may. But if you call it capital competition, then what we see here is the United States again fearful of the possibility that they will be secluded and excluded. If the wealthiest ruling class in the world is enclosed within the geographic zone of the United States, it must, as Margaret Flowers, and I'm expanding on her idea, Margaret Flowers alluded, they must reinvest in their own people. This will not create profit. It may sustain capitalism. I prefer to call it capital, as Isfan Betzaros insist, we think, that capital can only be sustained with expansion or die. Marx made that clear himself. And therefore, what we're facing is a system that must be voracious. It destroyed the internal benefit, material benefit of its own country, destroyed the soil, extracted the materials. To continue to do this, as Elon Musk noted recently, Bolivia has, and we're going to take it, I'm paraphrasing, of course, and the Bolivians better get used to it. In
Liv, can I
every
get into this
case, we
discussion,
want
please?
panic
Can
moments
we,
of the
can we
United
have,
States.
can we have a little
And
bit of a go around
end by
here?
just punctuating with one. When
No.
the Russian Revolution occurred and then the Chinese Revolution, 1940.
I think they can't hear you there with Jeff and all of them. I've asked a couple of times to participate, and there's been no response. They don't even look in my direction.
Third,
You can raise your hand and
the capitalists.
Jeff might see that.
From that moment in 1917 or 1939, wars were launched. First, I believe, for containment, and the Ukraine registers a new phase of aggression. And that aggression, I will review in a succinct way, I hope. I refer you to a book by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, The History of Indigenous Americans, in which she traces.
Norma has too,
She
although.
traces the aggression of the newly independent settler colonies as they march across the entire continent and head toward the Hawaii and into China. I think it was wonderful that Puccini wrote Madame Butterfly. Madame Butterfly summarizes in an acute way the pain that has been visited on the world. And I speak as an Italian American who had to watch and learn and be educated by the partigiani that survived, and all of Europe had been victimized by the victory over Stalin, well, there was a victory over Stalin, but over Mussolini and Hitler, the Nazis and the fascists. And we have not recovered from that. World War II was an extension of World War I, and what's going on, what went on in Yugoslavia and is pushing toward the East and surrounding, as Margaret Flowers also mentioned, surrounding the new effort to surround China using Taiwan and South Korea. is very dangerous for us all. I hope I've given you a reasonably satisfactory answer, and if not, please challenge it. Thank you very much.
Well, let me add to that although it was Russia that invaded Ukraine, the United States has a responsibility for that. At the end of the Cold War, there were those who said, well, there was no longer a need for NATO. But the United States insisted that NATO continue. And in the 1990s, under President Clinton, the decision was made to expand NATO. Although the United States had pledged it would not move 1 inch more toward Russia. In fact, NATO has been expanded right up to the Russian borders. And so it's not totally unexpected that that Putin decided to launch his invasion. Before doing so, though, he did make an offer to the United States to demilitarize the countries along the border of Russia. But President Biden turned a deaf ear to that. So the United States definitely does have a responsibility there for this terrible war. I see Jerry Harris has his hand up, and after that, Norma Harrison.
Good. NATO could have disbanded after the Warsaw Pact fell apart. But again, Cliff, I think you've gone down the rabbit hole of the proxy war realist George Kennan Kissinger school of thought here. What you haven't talked about is the fact that Latvia and Lithuania and Ukraine and all of these small and mid-sized countries have good reason to fear Russia, which is one of the largest armies in the world, the largest nuclear force in the world. You blame NATO for pushing to the east. It's true that they did push to the east. They didn't have to accept these countries, but these countries don't have to bend the knee to Putin and Russia. They could ally with anybody they choose to. They're independent countries and they have self-determination. And there's every reason in the world that they would rather ally with a democratic and economically healthy EU rather than an authoritarian fascist petrostate in Russia. So why are we so concerned with the Russians' legitimate security concerns, and you have no consideration for the legitimate security concerns of small states and mid-states who have suffered under the Russian yoke since the 1800s? I can't follow the logic. It's the same when Margaret and others like Code Pink talk about, well, I know what US imperialism does, and that's what I'm concerned with, not this other, as if there's an abandonment here of internationalism. We opposed the French in Algeria, we opposed the Portuguese in Angola, we oppose Israel in Palestine, we oppose the British in Ireland, but all of a sudden when it comes to the Russian invasion of Ukraine, all of a sudden we're only concerned with the US. It's not the US who invaded the Ukraine. It's not the US who is destroying the infrastructure and carrying out a war on the civilian population. That's the Russians. It's not the US who are murdering people. It's not the US who are raping and torturing people. That's the Russians. So let's get a let's get a grip on that. You know, this is a war of annexation. They've already have declared an official annexation of Eastern Ukraine and Crimea. And when we talk about the Minsk Accords, we should remember back when Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons, that Russia promised never to invade Ukraine. And in fact, if Ukraine held on to their nuclear weapons, Russia probably would not have invaded the Ukraine. So there's breaking of memorandums and agreements here on both sides. So again, independence and self-determination. The US is certainly not guiltless, but there's other imperialist powers in the world and always have been, whether they're British, the French, the Germans, the Portuguese, the Spanish, the US, the Russians. There's many imperialist powers in the world, not just the US. And we have to be consistent in our opposition to imperialism, particularly when there's an out and out invasion and an annexation of land. What the Russians are doing in Ukraine is what the US did in Iraq, totally destroying the infrastructure and waging a horrific war against the people who are resisting and have a right to resist, have a right to defend themselves. And if you call for a boycott of weapons going to Ukraine, it's a de facto call for the Russian victory. It's a de facto call for a successful annexation of Ukraine. I know you probably don't support that outright, although I've heard some voices on the left call for a Russian victory. But if you deny people the right of self-defense, they're going to be defeated. It's a Russian victory. And this is something that I have heard no one reply to in terms of this NATO proxy war thesis that people have. Capitalist accumulation, absolutely. The Russians want capitalist expansion and capitalist accumulation also. They are also a capitalist country. They are also after the agricultural wealth of Ukraine. They are also after the industrial base of Ukraine, not just the US. And in fact, who has invaded and seized and annexed the agricultural wealth and the industrial wealth of Ukraine? Not the US, the Russians have. So global capitalism is here, not just US capitalism, global capitalism, global imperialism. Let's be consistent in our oppositions to all imperialisms, not just one.
Well, should I begin speaking? I've got my hand up. What, can you hear me? Hello? Oops. I can't hear you if you're talking, and
Why don't you go ahead, Norma? I know we really disagree on this issue, but you've had your hand up for a hell of a long time, so why don't you just go ahead?
well, I don't know if Cliff can hear me, and I'd like to include whoever is able to hear my comments. For one thing, I have.
Yes, I hear you,
Okay.
Norma.
Thank you. I have posted material in the chat, and I'm going to email it to Cliff because I know that there are separate viewings for areas for this program, and I very much want to share what I have to, my position that's been very strong ever since all this started. And that's the beginning of it is that Stalin was a great defender of the revolution, that he has been maligned. You have to remember who is maligning Stalin. Who is maligning Stalin is your great enemy, the imperialists brutal, horrible Catholic-based system that has been attacking us, well, for millennia, I say, but attacking us surely ever since the Russian Revolution. The attack that was manifest through Ukraine has been going on against the border countries since 1917. Our owners fear that they are going to be replaced by a just system has been driving them and their toadies, the Western forces, to try to maintain their position in spite of the millennia of opposition from the masses of people that have been trying very hard to get rid of owners' oppression of us. The issues deposited into the Russia-Ukraine, it's Ukraine that attacked Russia. It's not the other way around. The issues deposited into the Russia-Ukraine conflict is that the invasion has been ongoing since 1917, really for the preceding millennia. It has been our owners' devastating, tortuous onslaught to maintain its ascendancy against our opposition. You know, we the people have been making communist struggle for forever. We want all to be able to participate. Well, it's been very difficult to work it out. Many social organizations have failed in the face of trying and then they've tried again, because it's the nature of us to be able to care for each other and ourselves. It has been our owners' devastating, tortuous onslaught to maintain its ascendancy against our opposition via communist struggle. Ukraine was just another area. You know, all the border countries came under the well, I'm going to continue reading it. I'm getting static in my earphones because someplace or other, there's no hearing going on. Anyway, let's see. Ukraine was another area. The border countries were brought under the control of the Soviet Union because the Soviet Union was scared to death that what has been going on for the past 100 years would go on. Ukraine was just another area that had been nationalized on and off long ago by the attempt of the Soviet Union to create strength on the part of the border countries and their own revolutionary position. Their subversion, the border countries' subversion by the Western forces has been by the billionaires and their followers, people like your deluded next door neighbors who think they too can become rich, whose rising it's necessary to destroy, that is the opposition's, to destroy the opposition in order for the rich to maintain their place in the world. All of this is staunchly defended by the Democratic Party, which is owned by our owners. The central product being foisted off on people today is debt. Everything is relative to debt now. And the signs are constant. Oh, you don't want to do it this way. Borrow it, make a loan. And of course, then along with that is not to have an opportunity to make enough money at jobs and so forth. That's denied. And so we're obligated. I mean, it's all a company town. Yeah, we're well familiar with that. I think that's most of what, and to remind you that Biden's fallback is his brutal background, which is Catholic. That says most of what I want to say, and that's most of what I'm going to send to Cliff. Maybe he'll disperse it to other people. The hatred of Russia is crazy. Russia. Oh, I know. I can send you one of our yesterday's broadcast. I forget his name, the fellow, we know him well, and I forget a lot of different things in between because it turns out I know so much because I'm driving myself crazy with understanding what's happening. But he had gone to Donetsk, to Donetsk and Luhansk, what do you call it, the Donbass. And he had talked to people, and then he traveled around in a bunch of places in Ukraine. And he found, and he went to Russia. He said he went for a week and he stayed for a month, and he went to Russia and he found the Russian people much in line with the ideas I'm expressing to you now, that they like the revolution. They wish they could access more and more of it. They wish it could have been maintained. They know that it was given away by the Western powers' constant attack against it. And they're very supportive of Stalinist principles, but it's called Stalinist. They're very supportive. Stalin was elected. He kept saying, don't elect me to the office. And they kept saying, please serve. And so he acquiesced. You know, they had a dictatorship of the proletariat. And we don't know to identify enough with the proletariat. And this is maligned by our owners. The Madison Avenue style of indoctrination is
Well, I wanna
incredible.
thank,
It meets us
all
from
of
the cradle.
those who
We are
participated in the
indoctrinated.
discussion. I hope you've found it as interesting as I did. Let me remind you that we encourage your donations,
Okay.
which you can send to www.globaljusticecenter.org. Any donation
Oh, I know. I don't have my
will be
earphones on.
welcome.
I missed what you.
Next,
I had turned my earphones off. My
Thursday,
my
we're going to
earphones
have,
canceled it out.
The first of our films, every Thursday at 11:30. We will be having films, and we will start off this Thursday with Salud. It's a film about the Cuban healthcare system and its medical missions abroad. And then on next Monday, a week from today, we will, well, you will be hearing me. I will be speaking on race as identity. So I hope that you'll join us for those. And I want to close by acknowledging our production team, Liz Mestres, Roberta Robles, Gregory Diamond, Bob Stone, Betsy Bowman, and myself. And now this is Cliff Duran signing off for now. Ciao. And we have some books back there. We're interested.